mine at, it's called Water's Edge Counseling and Healing Center. And we're in that's my passion.
Counselor here.
I know.
Okay. Okay. Wow. All right. I noticed that right away. I think we're going to get started. We'll let people kind of wander in. What you expecting?
Yes, a lot of Zoom. Is there a meeting ID number by any chance?
Yes. I know we're still all getting used to, we're supposed to be in person. Myself included, we have to get little triggers from the presence. I would appreciate your presence.
Right? What?
First gotta get back in action. A lot of
Yeah.
We're still web streaming these anyway, so we will.
Yeah, that's what she was saying. She etc. So we have to get used to the fact that we're living in a new world. Have some sugar, please. A pick, right? Is it okay? Okay. All right. Good afternoon. We're going to get started. I feel very awkward using this mic. However, I was reminded we have some people on Zoom, so we're still getting used to being in a dual world where some of us are present and some of us are present on Zoom. So welcome for joining us on TEDTalk Tuesday here at Winona State University. My name is Denise McDowell. I am the Vice President for Enrollment. I am here today to introduce our co-facilitator. Just a plug for TEDTalk Tuesdays. TEDTalk Tuesdays was designed for students by students. Students facilitate them. A student worker working with Natalie Williams in our office, plan, design, and talk about it. And it's about those topics that students think are important, that their peers and they feel like sharing with the community to engage us in a conversation. So today we have Jennifer. She is a clinical mental health student in the Masters of Counseling Education program here at Winona State University. Her goal is to work with individuals that suffer from eating disorders. And she strives to educate others on the impact of weight stigma. Additionally, she believes health at every size. She currently works as a children's therapeutic skills worker at Hiawatha Valley Mental Health Center. And we believe one day, she may actually be a counselor at the counseling center at Winona State.
Thank you so much. I'm really happy to be here today. So thanks everybody for coming out. I see a lot of friendly faces and thanks for the Zoom attendance as well. I really appreciate it. I know I'm supposed to say a fun fact about my thinking about this all day. So I thought I would just talk about my cats because I love my cats. So I have two cats. Their names are Winnie and Dandelion, and they are the cutest and the most amazing thing in my life. So that's a fun fact about me. Just a little bit more about me. This topic is really important to me because I am a survivor of eating disorders. I've spent about 12 years of my life suffering from a variety of different eating disorders, and I'm really passionate about working with people with eating disorders, specifically adolescents. So in the fall, I will have a practicum at Water's Edge, which is in Burnsville, Minnesota, and I'm working with adolescents with eating disorders. So I'm really excited about that. And then I just want to say really briefly, this is a topic that a lot of people, it's hard for a lot of people to grasp and understand. So I just want to say, keep your mind open, and just try to look at things from a different perspective. So we'll go ahead and play that TED Talk for you guys.
Hi, I'm Virgie Tovar, and I'm here tonight to talk to you about how body size affects people's lives, relationships, and careers. Specifically, how being fat affects these things. People of all sizes tend to report a dissatisfaction with their bodies, but fat people tend to have less access to meaningful participation in society. Most people believe that discriminating against fat people isn't discrimination at all. Sometimes we don't even realize how our implicit bias affects the ways we view the world around us. For example, is it possible that you would believe me or imagine me a qualified expert if I were 250 pounds instead of the size I am now? Let's see. Hi, I'm Virgie Tovar. And I'm here tonight to talk to you about the ways that body size affects people's lives, relationships, and careers, in particular, how being fat affects these things. People of all sizes tend to report dissatisfaction with their bodies, but fat people actually have less access to meaningful participation in society. Most people believe that discrimination against fat people isn't discrimination at all. Sometimes it's difficult to see how implicit bias shapes the way we see the world around us. For example, is it possible that you are less likely to believe me or imagine me as a trained professional or an expert now that you know that I'm the real Virgie Tovar? While you think about that, I want to tell you a story. I want you to imagine me at 4 years old. My favorite part of the day was when we got home from running errands or from preschool. I would push open the front door with both small hands and I would take off running through the living room, through the hallway, past my bedroom, past the washer dryer that made funny sounds that I liked, and into the bathroom. I would take off all my clothes, wiggling out of my pants, nearly ripping my way out of my t-shirt like it was an inconvenient membrane. I would leave my clothes in a pile on the floor and I would take off back towards the kitchen where my grandmother was always cooking. When I reached the end of the hallway where the calico cat-colored rug turned into the linoleum of the hallway, rather of the dining room, I would stop. I would spread out my arms and legs as far as I could, and I would jiggle. My thighs and belly, my cheeks would wobble, my entire body would undulate like the water in the bathtub or like at the community pool that I love so much in the summer. My body was like that water, a source of relief and fun, a place I could jump into and feel held. It felt good. Oh, it felt so good. I think back on that story now and I can barely believe that it's my own. It feels so far away. I feel protective of that little girl who could not have imagined the horrible education and body shame that was awaiting her. Less than a year later, those jiggle-filled afternoons would disappear. I would enter kindergarten and the kids in my class would teach me the lessons that they had learned about bodies from the culture. My native relationship to my body would be stolen from me, and in its place would grow one toxic idea: your body is wrong. that idea would threaten my happiness and ultimately my health for the next nearly 2 decades. It turns out that my story, even the timing of the events, were part of a bigger cultural narrative. Researchers have found that very young US children show an understanding that fatness should be avoided at pretty much any cost. In fact, they asked a group of 5-year-olds if they would rather lose an arm or be fat, and they chose losing an arm. I was not unlike those 5-year-olds. I too believed that I should do anything in my power to change my body because I'd been taught that people like me were ugly and inferior, that my fatness was an external manifestation of internal monstrosity. Even though I hated dieting, I did it for nearly 20 years because I believed I had to lose weight if I wanted love, success, visibility, and freedom. I believed that life would begin later. I would wear a bathing suit later. I would go on a date later. I would wear my favorite outfit. I would travel later. The history of dieting is much older than most people realize. The grandfather of modern day dieting was named Reverend Sylvester Graham. He rose to prominence in the 1800s and is now known for his namesake invention, the graham cracker. Graham believed that delicious, well-spiced foods led to lasciviousness, and that low-flavor, low-fat foods led to purity of mind and body. He started the dietary reform movement. He and his followers believed that through food, you could control morality. The same ideological basis of dieting today. Dieting was there during every formative step of my life. I was starving myself for the first time in the summer before elementary school. I was on a diet the day I graduated from high school. I had my first bout of hunger-induced exhaustion when I was overseas in college for the first time. And when I got my BA in political science, I was calorie counting the meal following the ceremony. It never once occurred to me that maybe the problem wasn't me. Maybe there was something not quite right about a culture that hated me so much just because I was bigger than other people. I never thought to blame fat phobia, the bigotry ideology that positions fat people as inferior. I only ever blamed myself. It wasn't until I began researching fat in graduate school that my ideas about all of this began to change. It was 2010, and fat studies was an emerging discipline with only a handful of books and articles. It was in this fledgling environment that I began interviewing women who had been fat their whole lives. I wanted to understand how their body size had affected the trajectory of their lives. I found that no matter what I asked them in interviews, the stories kept coming back to clothing, gender, alienation. One of my participants told me about what it was like growing up for her and how she always felt like she was straddling a line between boy and girl. A lot of times during playtime, little girls reenact heterosexual romances, and a lot of times the biggest girl is just chosen as the most appropriate for the boyfriend or the husband role. This is rarely discussed. It's often just understood that the biggest girl is best suited for the role. A number of my participants talked about never being able to find clothing in the girls' department, their department, and still others talked about how little boys in their school when they grew up treated them more roughly than they did their smaller girlfriends. I found that these experiences led to gender confusion. And often in adulthood, many of my participants had much more sophisticated gender stories, and they felt that they had to perform gender more aggressively and more creatively than their smaller counterparts. I began to realize that the way that I had been taught to think of fat, the way that I'd been taught to see my own body, was not inevitable. It wasn't even universal. It was cultural. In no other example did this become more clear than when I began reading the work of anthropologists who did ethnographies in regions of the contemporary world where women go to extreme lengths to become as fat as possible. Because where they live, fat rolls and stretch marks are the height of feminine beauty. Sometimes women even die from consuming weight-gaining medications designed for animals. I realized that no matter what the standard Fat or thin, women will go to extraordinary lengths to fulfill whatever their culture standard of beauty happens to be if they don't feel like they have a viable alternative. In the midst of all this, I was going deeper and deeper down the rabbit hole as a scholar and as a person, and someone asked me if I'd ever heard of a conference specifically designed for fat people. Well, I hadn't, but I looked it up online, registered, and a few weeks later, I was on the BART, taking a bus to Oakland, California, where the conference was being held. I dragged my sad little navy blue suitcase, a broke grad student, through the parking lot of the hotel, and I entered the breezeway. And about halfway through, I could smell chlorine, I could hear splashing. And as I exited the breezeway, I saw something that I'd never seen before. Something I had been told did not exist. All around the pool were gorgeous fat women in amazing bathing suits. They were laughing and chatting. They were swimming and napping. They were just living without any discernible trace of the shame I'd always seen on women like them, women like us. And then something even more magical happened. From the edge of this tableau came a redhead. Big arms, big belly, big thighs. She was wearing a red vintage cut bathing suit covered in white polka dots and dramatic cat eye sunglasses. She did not walk, she sauntered. And trailing behind her was a boy carrying a parasol over her head so she wouldn't burn. Some might call this a come to Jesus moment. When I saw her, I saw the potential for my own shame-free future. In 2014, not long after that poolside moment, I started a campaign called Lose Hate, Not Weight. I wanted to tell people that it was not weight that needed to be shed, but rather the ideology that we aren't perfect no matter what our size. I began to solicit submissions from women. I wanted to understand women who had declared peace in their relationship on their body, women who had stopped trying to control their weight. One of the first stories I got was from a woman named Abby. Abby started to have excruciating uterine cramps in her 20s, and she tried to ignore it, but ended up at the hospital, and her doctor took one look at her, saw a fat person, and rather than examine her, told her that she simply needed to lose weight, and the pain would go away. Even though Abby sensed that there was something more serious happening inside, she didn't feel empowered to speak back to the doctor. So she left, and she didn't return to another doctor for 3 years. And during those 3 years, a tumor grew inside of her, unmonitored and undetected. She spent most of her 20s in treatment for cancer, and she told me that the language that she heard about cancer, that it was an invasive alien force that had taken over her body, reminded her of the way that people had talked about her fatness. And through making peace with cancer, she was able to make peace with her body. Abby is now in remission. One of my favorite stories came from a woman named Erin. Erin was in a terrible car accident when she was in college. A truck came over the dividing line, hit her head on, and totaled her car. She had to be removed with the jaws of life and helicoptered to the nearest hospital. Even though nearly every inch of her body was covered in lacerations and bruises, her internal organs were perfectly intact. Her doctor told her that if she hadn't been carrying a little extra weight, she would have definitely died. She said to me, "It's pretty hard to hate your body after something like that." Erin is now a well-known burlesque star in Seattle. I want to leave you with one last story. And it's one that occurred recently in November. I took a group of women to Jamaica. And every single morning, we would walk out to the edge of the Caribbean Sea. We would spread out our arms and legs as far as we could, and we would jiggle. The experience released something inside of us, the remembrance of freedom, the remembrance and the connection to ourselves as magical, the idea that our bodies are these incredible vehicles that take us through the most meaningful parts of our lives. So I want to leave you with the sentiment that you shouldn't wait one more day, one more pound, The next time that you look in the mirror and you have the impulse to judge the body you see, or you look at another person and have the impulse to judge their body, remember that childlike sense of wonder. After all, you have nothing to lose but your shame. Thank you.
All right. So what do you guys think, first of all, like first impressions? Anybody wanna give a first impression? You can be honest. This is open. We're open here. Sure.
My very first impression was I had never seen a TED Talk that started with a switcheroo like that. And I thought it was a really clever way to get into the topic, because we brought to it a set of assumptions and then those were underlined. I don't remember ever seeing a TED Talk though, where somebody switched places with somebody like that.
Thanks for saying that.
Interesting deal.
Yeah, it's a really good point. You know, she had a very good intention for that. It was to show that we do judge people based on their weight. So that's awesome. You noticed that right away. Oh, Grace said, this is cool. I want to be at the pool party. Nice, Grace. Okay, so I came up with some questions to really challenge everyone. So if you're on Zoom too, participate if you can. But I don't know if you guys would want to break into small groups or if we just want to have a large discussion. It's kind of up to you guys. What do you think?
Guide our thinking, whatever you
Yeah.
prefer. Yeah, we're good.
Sure. Do you think breaking out or?
I was thinking large.
Oh, yeah, let's just have a large group and then on Zoom, if you want to say something, please just unmute yourself and share. So the first question I have, and we kind of just talked about this, but how did you react when the real Virgie Tovar came out? And President Olson, you kind of said your reaction, but does anybody else want to share today? Sure.
I was just surprised, like I wasn't expecting them to like bring another person out. But yeah, you know, I'm just surprised. I mean, I didn't think anything like negative about it. But,
Sure. Yeah, thank you. You were just kind of surprised with the switch.
yeah.
Anyone else? And you can be completely honest, guys.
I guess when I saw that she was leaving the stage, I was like, okay, I see what's going on here. And I also thought it was a good thing to do, because I think that's a bias that we all as humans can do when it comes to just prejudging people and being disrespectful, I would say. But I thought it was just spot on is how we probably think as individuals.
Yeah. So did anybody kind of have an uncomfortable feeling inside? You can be honest, because when I saw this video for the first time, I'll be honest, my own internalized fat phobia, my own history of diet culture and a bunch of stuff got in the way, and I was a little uncomfortable for a minute. Anybody feel that uncomfortableness? There's a fat woman walking on stage. To admit, but I think we have to be honest with ourselves to challenge weight stigma, and that starts with you. So, yeah, go ahead, Lex.
Yeah. I've realized, okay.
I really appreciate that. Does anyone else want to share? I see we have a comment. It says, it was pretty awesome seeing a plus size gal up front, honest, and being so awesome with loving herself and inspiring others. So that's actually my sister. So that's really awesome to hear.
I think another, if I may, I think another thing too, through the years, clothing for women of various sizes have changed so that you can look stylish at any size, whether you're a 2 or you're 42. And that has changed and made a big difference as well, where before that wasn't the case. You'd have to wear a muumuu or a dun or something that would allow room now. Everybody can wear same thing.
Yeah, I love that personally. I'm kind of in the middle where I'm more like, I still can do standard size, but I can also do plus size. So I'm on that edge where I'm like doing both, and it is nice to see more options. But I still think there's a lot of work that needs to be done, especially in like actually having to close in stores and not having to shop online. So yeah, but does anybody have anything else to add about that first question there? Sure.
This is actually a technical question. I think it's for Natalie. Can they hear us online if we don't have the microphone? They can.
It seems like they can,
Okay.
yes.
Okay,
No
yeah.
complaints.
Okay, so the next question, have you ever heard of fat phobia or weight stigma? And can you name examples of where and how this exists? Sure.
I'm gonna go back to your first question too. And my first thought was, has nothing changed in 40 years since when I was an undergraduate student? We were looking at advertising and how the image of women in advertising. And this is still an example of how this exists. We're getting a little bit better, as you talked about fashion and in advertising, but it's still pretty much sways towards very extremely thin women in advertising.
Yeah, it definitely does. Yeah. Does anybody want to add to that question? Sure.
I would say that my experience with fat phobia has come in terms of sports. It's just, interesting, especially when you think about men versus women, how, football players and their physique, I'm trying to say that correctly. Just like kind of like never know, I guess, or how healthy they are, how fast they are, how quick they are, how they train their body, things like that. But I just remember just seeing that, just when I was younger, even just assuming that somebody cannot run, cannot outlast, can't be as physical or as savvy just because of their weight. So yeah.
Yeah, just to go off that, actually, when I was in high school, I was in track. I still run to this day. And I was in track, and I mean, this is, when I was going through all my eating disorders and stuff too, but there's a guy on my team and I gained some weight and he had saw how fast I ran. And he was like, I can't believe you can run that fast, because he was making comments about my weight and couldn't believe that somebody in a larger body could run. So it's everywhere. It happens all the time. And it's very prevalent in sports, and a lot of eating disorders can develop from sports. Like the biggest ones are like cross country, running sports, and wrestling is a really big one too. So, yeah. Yeah, Miriam.
Yeah, I was gonna say that I remember hearing the term fat phobia, maybe like the start of high school, maybe like 2012, 2013. When really BuzzFeed was becoming a big thing, and the BuzzFeed videos like explaining like different like topics and just like a bigger awareness on like mental health and stuff like that. So I remember that being pretty big when I was in high school, and I feel like it's only gotten like more awareness, more information out there. But yeah, what do you think, Jen?
Yeah, so I personally didn't really learn about fat phobia or diet culture or anything like that until I was in college, to be honest. I was like recovering from eating disorders, and I had come across a podcast, which I definitely recommend if you're interested. It's called Food Psych. It's ran by Christy Harrison. She's a dietitian that focuses on health at every size. She's amazing. I actually have her book with me if you want to take a look later. But I came across it and it was like one of those moments for me where everything made sense, where I realized that everything I had gone through, it made sense, and it kind of drove me further to want to accomplish my goal and my dream of being an eating disorder therapist. So definitely a really good podcast to check out. Lots of research has gone into this work. So, but I heard about it, and it was hard because I would try to have conversations with friends and family members in my life that they just didn't understand what I was saying. I've gotten in pretty big arguments with people about this because they believe being fat is bad, and that you should go on a diet if you're fat, and that people that are fat do have worse health outcomes, when actually there's not a lot of research done on the effects that weight stigma actually has on health. So that's a component of research that's not there, so we truly don't know. So it's been a long journey for me, but it's something that's very important to me. And then I just want to read Taylor. She said, "I've heard about it existing in the medical field. As she mentioned, there are people who are told to lose weight instead of the doctor actually checking if there is anything else going on." So I thought that was incredibly sad. I've heard stories like this all over about people just being told that, oh, you need to lose weight, that's your problem. If you just lost some weight, you would feel better. And that's not the case. And it's kind of a topic for another day. Okay, you can hear the people? Oh, okay, and then we have another comment. I had an experience with a doctor advising me to lose weight for my health issues. Yeah, it's very common for people in larger bodies to experience that. Something that I do when I go to my doctor now, I have told her, hey, I don't want to be weighed. I don't really think it's necessary. And she's been like, yeah, we don't have to weigh you if you don't want. And I've had a literal conversation with her about this topic. And she was able to indicate like, yeah, that's actually, we're doing some work here. It's at Gunderson, actually. They're doing some work and learning more about weight stigma. So I thought that was incredible. So, okay, and then we have Grace said, yeah, when she pointed out that fat people are seen as less credible and just seen as lesser all around by the broader society, it really resonated with me because I absolutely see that. I personally am in what society would call a mid-size, an able body, and I even see the privilege involved with my body size and weight compared to others living in larger bodies. I've even fluctuated in weight, and there is a significant difference in how people treat me depending on my body size because of fat phobia and weight stigma. So I actually also can relate to this, so thank you so much, Grace. Back when I had my eating disorders and I was in a thinner body, I was treated completely different than I'm treated now. I would be asked out on more dates. I would be bought more drinks if I was out and about. And in general, people just kind of took me more seriously. If I posted, oh, I went on a run today, people were like congratulating me. And now if I post like, I went on a run today, nobody acknowledges it. It's like, oh, fat girl went on a run, you know? So I definitely can relate to this. But yeah, I'm gonna pull us on to our next question, which is, Virgie talks about the history of dieting. What do you think about this? Yeah, President Wilson.
Well, the story that she shared about Mauritania reminds us these things are socially constructed, and even within American culture at different points in time, we've had different ideas of the apex of beauty, right? It's changed. And one need only go look at an art gallery and you can see different conceptions of what male and female bodies should look like over time. So we're in a moment that has a certain set of social constructions, but there's nothing intrinsic about it.
Yeah, that was well put.
It gets reinforced by advertising, by Hollywood images that create certain ideals, but there's nothing intrinsic about them. They're just socially constructed.
Yeah, it's also similar like diet culture, and I'm not sure if everybody here knows what diet culture is, but it's basically the idea that thinness is elevated above fatness, and some foods are considered good and some foods are considered bad. But diet culture surrounds us in advertisements. It's dieting companies, and I am gonna say some Herbalife, Advocare, companies that are really pushing this weight loss. And these are companies that are even targeting college audiences. So you'll see them come on college campuses, try to recruit people, try to get them to buy their shakes and their teas. Also, they can lose weight only if people really knew dieting doesn't work. 5 years down the road, you're gonna gain all your weight back plus more.
Well, a fundamental concept of advertising is to create an anxiety about something and then position the consumption of a certain product as the solution to the anxiety that the ad itself created. And that could be just toothpaste, right? Well, Jane, Brad didn't ask me out on a date again. Did you ever think it might be your teeth? Setting aside, like everything else. And I use Pepsodent, so I get asked out on a lot of dates, right? So it creates an anxiety. Here's the problem, and then it positions itself as the solution to the problem that it has created. And I have to believe that the diet culture, whatever you call it, this is $1 billion industry, right?
Oh,
Of the
absolutely.
creation of anxiety, that then positioning itself as the resolution to that anxiety.
Yeah, and it's crazy. Yeah, thank you for that. Lex, go ahead.
Yeah, I do want. Started in the 1800s, because that just all. Now we can. Then we're.
It was part of the Great Awakening in American history. There were a lot of, that's the time when the Christian Science movement emerged, and there was a lot of interesting religious movements. But I think in the case of Graham, if we looked back on what they were doing, the word we might use today is a cult. And here we've got Graham crackers on the shelf at home in my house. I like it. But it's weird to think that, because the origins of a lot of that stuff, I think today, if you looked at it, would look cultish.
Same stick.
Controlling what you eat, controlling what you think, controlling utopian, controlling with whom you live, etc.
I wonder if it had another thing. I mean, I think about that. Think about back here. Move. If you're thinner, you up, move you. If you're not, more to do that. So I'm thinking if we really go back and think about how it associated with being a size, or even in the modeling industry, it took less fabric to cover a model, size 1, than it would be to cover a model that's a size. One is we talk about what behind it. Back to the cave days. If we go back to as to my time, Twiggy was the model. Everybody wanted to do that. And so even culturally, when we think about that and who's in the magazine and who's the dolls, they did things with dolls and skin tone and size and hair and all those things. So it all has another origin that became part of the social construct. The question is, how in my mind and why? And that's something I'm gonna look at. Where did that really kind of, I could move you, I could drag you, I could pick you up, and I can't do that if you're a certain size. I expect you to pick me up and move me. And
That's a really interesting observation. I think part of it historically was tied to perceptions of wealth, right? That if you were marrying into status, there were times in the past where having an ample frame meant you were in a family with abundance. You had lots of food. You didn't have to work in the fields. You didn't have to work too hard. You were of leisure, male or female. And then somehow, when food became more ample, like probably right before Twiggy, you know, and it wasn't a question of getting enough food, it was the kind of food people were getting. Then those images changed, but if you don't know who Twiggy is, look her up. She was rail thin.
Yes. And the corsets, you know, think about women. We put corsets on them. They have these small waists. So again, the bigger you were, more it took to do that, and you were condemned if that corset couldn't tighten your waist to get it to whittle down. So it's something to it that piques my curiosity. Now, where did it start and why?
Yeah, real quick, the book I have, I'm gonna pull out here at the end, but she literally goes into the history of like diet culture. Like this woman is amazing. She spent years on this book and there's so much. So if you're interested, definitely, I would say, you can even borrow it from me or buy it or whatever.
What's the name of it?
It's called Anti-Diet, Reclaim Your Time, Money, Well-Being, and I'm trying to remember, and health through intuitive eating. But yeah, so it's a really great read. Yeah, Lex.
Just another comment. Wait. It necessarily always made to me skinnier, but to
This is a really interesting point because it was about an hourglassiness, and I have found interesting as a fairly modern trend. So again, if you were around in the 60s and 70s, Twiggy and Kate Moss, was that her name?
Yeah.
You know, but all right, I'm really not an expert on Kardashians, but didn't one of the Kardashians actually have enhancement surgery to look more hourglassy? Am I wrong about this?
Yeah.
Correct.
So that's a head scratcher to me. To your puzzlement about like, where do these things even come from?
Yeah,
And those are dangerous surgeries.
yeah.
To the point, the person online about, yes, these things are dangerous. Toothpaste isn't dangerous, but these things are dangerous.
Yeah, quick, this person said, who's AD? I just wanna know who it is.
I am not sure who AD is.
Okay, well, it's nice to hear from you. I'm so glad you're on, that's awesome. So an important distinction between advertising for diet products and diet culture versus other products, for instance, toothpaste, is that one directly leads to a life-threatening mental health disorder and the other leads to a preference in toothpaste. Well said, exactly. Nailed it. So yeah, I'm gonna bring us down, we're on our fourth question now. What comes to mind when you hear the word fat? Lex?
I guess that's a pretty open. When I hear the word. I mean, I.
Fat. If someone's like, oh yeah, she was fat, what do you think?
I think it's a perception because I hang out with a lot of teenagers lately. Let me clarify that. They hang out at my house.
Clarify that.
Not that they want to be with me, but it's a perception of yourself because someone who isn't, I don't know, where are the boundaries? But some of them will say, I'm fat and degrading themselves, and they're clearly not. So, where are the goalposts, as you say? Can I go back to 3 real quickly?
Sure.
In the history, I'm hoping that Winona State is changing the history of that when we talk about diet, or we talk about wellness at Winona State, that let's also talk about mental wellness and mental health. And again, back to the perception, if we feel like we're comfortable with our weight, whatever it's at, we're going to feel mentally more well. And Mariel's going to join our counseling center this fall. I'm so excited. I hope she'll see that you're looking at the whole concept of wellness. If we're going to talk about diet, talk about mental health and mental wellness.
Yeah.
That's what you're doing. Thank you.
Yeah, it is really important. So for me, like when I heard the word fat for years of my life, it was always bad. It was like, oh, being fat is the worst thing in the world. Like, I mean, this is like disordered eating thoughts, but I was like, I would rather die than be fat. Like, that's so sad for someone to feel that way and for her to have those kind of thoughts. And that's why I'm doing the work I'm doing, because being fat is not a bad thing. And there's a lot of people who embrace the word fat and use it in a very positive way and use it as an identifying term for themselves. And there's a lot of power in that word for people, but there are people who don't like that word because it brings back a lot of trauma from their past, being called that and internalizing that. So for me, when I think of the word fat now, I am in a lot better place now. I think it's just a word. I can use it if I want to and identify myself that way if I want, or I cannot use it, but it's taken a long time to get there. So, yeah.
There's a history, of reclaiming pejorative terms and owning them. And she was doing that, right? With that word.
Absolutely.
She's like, I'm just gonna own this word and reclaim it.
Yes.
And that was interesting too.
Yeah, and in the podcast I had referenced earlier to, one of the big things she talks about is really sensitive in the podcast about, some people like that term and some people don't. Like you said, some people will own it and identify with it, and some people, it's not where they're at or what they like. Okay, all right, last question. Thanks for sticking with me, guys. How can we fight the cultural standards of beauty?
I guess just loving your own body and not trying to conform to whatever the trend is right now, because it's always changing. You can't be changing your body every so often, to think that it's not. So yeah, if everybody just started loving their own bodies more, I think it would just kind of get rid of the stigmas and all these trends and stuff.
Yeah.
To kind of go off what I was saying, there's just so many trends nowadays of body shapes and what's in, what's out. It changes like that nowadays, it seems like. Also positive of having social media is that there is I guess diversity to a bigger diversity of bodies and people loving their bodies. So yeah.
Sure.
I was just gonna say, going off of Ella again, I think to get to that point of loving ourselves is doing what you're doing right now. Is we're all here in a place, we learned something new today, I'm pretty sure. Dr. Olson was just dropping gems all day. It's been good. So yeah, I just think what you're doing and spreading the word and being intentional about it is important. And when I think about cultural standards in beauty and advertising, it reminds me of 2 commercials I can think of right now where I can see, I think they're selling women's sports bras and leggings and stuff, but they're showing women in shirts. They're showing darker skin complexions, and I'm like, that's advertising, that's real, it's genuine. And I remember, this is going a whole different topic, but I believe it was about a woman taking a pregnancy test. And it didn't show the whole yes, I'm excited to be pregnant. It was the case where it's oh no, this wasn't supposed to happen, or that type of thing. And I'm like, oh, that perspective you don't really see. Now that's something that's genuine. So let's be real. So, yes, I think it takes.
Just real quick, I'm gonna read off what Taylor said. She said, take time to educate ourselves on the issue and listen to those who the toxic diet culture affects. I think that's really good to point out. Taylor's somebody I know and is a friend of mine, and Taylor resides in like a thinner body, so understanding thin privilege. Are you guys aware of what thin privilege is? So basically, if you live in a thinner body, you have a little more privilege than somebody who lives in a larger body. That includes being able to go into a store and literally buy clothes and walk out. So I really thank you, Taylor, for recognizing that and saying that. Lex?
Yeah, I see.
and got to get. There, it's not quite.
Okay, we said Irish, but I said.
Three thoughts. One, we would call out folks on social media or in other contexts if they were making racist, sexist, homophobic, or transphobic comments. We can do the same with, I'm not sure quite what the word would be, fatphobic comments. I liked to address the systemic stuff we have to do what Dr. Johnson's talking about, which is talk about wellness. And wellness is a whole body thing. And mind and mental health is a huge part of that. So that does chip away at it. And then celebrate. Lizzo is beautiful.
I love
Queen
Lizzo.
Latifah is, hey, she's a Minnesota Vikings fan, Lizzo. Queen Latifah is beautiful, and celebrate kind of their beauty as part of it. Not just call it out when people are critiquing, but celebrate it when it's there.
Yes.
So I just thought this was interesting because it happened to my husband recently. He went into a new doctor for his annual exam. So of course they did the weighing and whatnot. And of course they get you all gowned up. You're sitting there, you're waiting to start. The doctor walks in, doesn't look at him, doesn't address him, sits down and starts looking at the computer. First word out of his mouth was to him were, boy, according to BMI, you need to lose weight. Okay, what they don't realize, when he turned around and actually looked at him, he CrossFits 3 times a week. That weighs more than, muscles, and I don't, again, means weighs more than fat. And they just assumed without having a conversation, and I think, so we talked about this because he was quite upset. And that BMI chart, first of all, get rid of that. I mean, right, it's that, so, I mean, but doctors need to be educated more. Or the BMI chart needs to go away or change or something, but is that not horrible to do to it? Because I mean, he was upset by it without even taking it. And then judging according to BMI chart.
It's really interesting too, if people like actually did the research on BMI, like, and how it was created, and that's in the book I talked about too. But literally overnight in the 90s, the BMI changed. So overnight, people who were considered at a normal or healthy weight were considered overweight or obese. So like they just randomly were like, well, let's tweak this thing up a little, let's make life a little crazy for people. So I just think it's terrible. Yeah, I'm like, why are we using the BMI still? When I hear that, I automatically am like, I rethink everything. I'm like, where am I? Is this a good place? Is this a woke space for me to be? Is this credible? You know, because that's not a good not great to use.
I know what you said in middle school and health class, we were learning about like BMI and like physical health and stuff. And we all had to find our own BMI, which I think like was not. Because there were like some guys in the class, they were like football players or, you know, and they had like muscle and they were like, they weren't like bad, I guess, but they just were like bigger, big muscle and stuff. And according to the BMI, they were overweight. And then they all felt like really bad about themselves. And I felt bad for them because I'm like, you guys look healthy, you exercise, like, you know, but they just still felt like really bad about themselves.
Yeah, I hated that part of school. Like I remember in the 5th grade, like we all had to get weighed outside of our classrooms. And that was like terrible for me because I remember learning how much I weighed and being like, oh my gosh, I was so scared. I was like, this is bad. And I was like, what did that do for them? Like, what did that do for them at all to know how much I weighed? Like, why did the nurse waste her time coming around to everybody's room just to get their weight? It's crazy. But Lex, you had something?
My class. If they do think that's
Yeah, and I just want to quick say, I did see Taylor's say, let's call people in instead of, you know, when people do, let's educate others and call them in and share what we know versus calling them out for being potentially fat phobic or something. And I agree with that 100%. We have a question. I have a question if that's okay. How can we address body size vocabulary with others in a respectful way? For example, how can we know when to use people living in larger bodies versus curvy versus fat when talking to someone? Is there a best way to talk about it? That's a really good question. Does anybody here think they would want to answer? Yes.
gorgeous.
I usually wait for how the person identifies themselves. If a person is telling me if they call themselves fat and identify that way, then I would feel more comfortable identifying them that way. It's how you identify yourself. So if I'm skinny, that's how I would identify, but I don't identify that way, just making sure you do. But so just taking into consideration how they identify their bodies as themselves. Does that make sense, Grace? I think that was Grace. Okay, and then how we fight the cultural standards of beauty. I just want to say that can be done too with kind of stopping diet culture and diet talk. I mean, seriously, in some of the most woke spaces, I have heard people talk about their diets, and it's so annoying to me. Like, I do not care about your diet. Like, it's very toxic to the people around you for you to talk about, oh yeah, I'm on this diet, I'm drinking my shake today with my tea. I just, like, we're better than this. Let's have productive conversations. Like, I just don't, maybe that's a personal opinion, but I just don't think it's productive to help others if we're talking about diets and diet culture. Especially and I hate to target it, but especially places like universities. Like, let's do better, let's educate ourselves. Yeah, are we close on time? Is that what you're giving me? Okay, sorry. It's been really great talking with you guys. I have a lot of information, and obviously I'm very passionate about this. So if you guys ever have any questions, maybe I can throw my email somewhere on there and they could email me. So just be better, fight against diet culture, fight against these cultural standards, call people in, like Taylor said. Yeah, and so thank you guys so much for watching today, and thanks for your participation in the audience. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
I'm gonna take.
I'm literally,
They will.
No, yeah. I knew, yeah, I mean, I was already like.
Anyway.
Yeah. I liked it. I think like professors and
You run into very you're gonna
the medical, yeah.
She said, I like advertising.
I mean,
Next spring.
yeah, I know somebody. Yeah.
And we ran into someone like,
Wait a second. Yeah. But how it works with masks
Someone was blonde at the time.
Yeah.
And I had more darker.
We're the opposite.
So, yeah.
Y'all best friends?
They used to work.
We used to.
Oh, just today.
Yeah.
When she told me
Yes.
to sign up.
Okay.
By the background?
I know.
Oh, okay, cool. It went so good. No, I'm like 8 people joined on Zoom. I'm really happy about that. And so usually
Yes.
Good guys. Plain language.